Hey folks, this is Desmaret, and I just wanted to use this vlog to kind of do a little bit of a brief reflection on the USA ESW qualifiers for 2015 that I took a little bit of a part in yesterday, the day before this, which was, I guess, the end of May, May 31st, and today's June 1st when I'm recording this. So it just took place yesterday, so it's still pretty fresh in my mind. And so essentially what I wanted to do is just kind of provide some reflections, maybe a little bit about what we learned from the qualifiers in regards to the pecking order, so to speak, of North America right now, as far as where the CSGO team sit and maybe a ranking perspective, though it is just one event, so it's very hard to, draw a bunch of huge conclusions from it, but it does add to the data pool alongside some of the online league play where we can kind of begin to understand who are maybe some of the tier 1 teams in NA, some of the teams that are on the brink, kind of tier 2, middle of the pack type teams, and also just talk a bit about maybe some of the issues or maybe even some of the good things that some of these teams kind of showcase in this event. And so I'll kind of just go team by team and talk a little bit about the games and how they went and just a little bit about what we kind of saw from each team, good or bad. So the first team I'll start out with is Liquid, who are the champions. So congratulations to them. They will be representing USA in Montreal. I think it's towards the middle or end of July as the USA representative. This is good news for Liquid. Obviously, they've had some struggles. They've had some roster issues. They definitely had a couple of poor showings overseas in Europe, and their online league play in NA has been a kind of a mixed bag, to be honest. And I spent a good time in the vlog right before this one talking about Liquid, talking about some of their recent performances and highlighting some of the pros and cons, so to speak, of the team and some of the issues that they have. So I'll try to incorporate that into this section as best as I can, but it would be good if you check that video out if you want to hear kind of a little bit more about Liquid, because I did kind of go pretty in depth on them as a team in that video, so you might want to check that out. But anyway, they start out the tournament by 2-1-ing the team Lunatic. Lunatic kind of a lower tier team in the pro scene of NA, I guess you could say. They do compete in the pro leagues, but they're not really ranked very high. But they did find a way to get a win against Liquid on Mirage. Close game, 16-13. Just being able to have a slightly better CT side than Liquid was. They had 10 rounds, whereas Liquid only had 9. And then, of course, a little bit better T side because of that. However, they didn't proceed to get crushed on D2 and Train. So Liquid took care of business there. Like I said, they did have kind of a close loss on Mirage, but otherwise they took care of business. They got 2 pretty big map wins right after that, so no problem. So I thought that Liquid had kind of the harder journey at this point to get to the finals in comparison to Cloud9, who we'll talk about in a second. Their next game, they had to play against CLG, who, granted, is probably one of the most inconsistent teams in North America. Yes, they at times look like one of the best teams, like a top 3 team in NA, but then sometimes they just look completely off their game. And this has been something that's been taking place with this team ever since Aspen X Games, I guess, in January. We've seen the highs and lows of this team, and I know that they're still kind of iffy on a 5th. I didn't even put a CLG section in this video, I don't think, in my notes, but they're still kind of iffy on a 5th. It seems like they're pretty solidified with JDM, but I'm not quite sure. But anyway, their tournament was pretty short. I mean, getting 2-0'd by Liquid. It wasn't as if they were crazy one-sided games, but it was a situation where CLG did definitely get straight up 2-0'd. Essentially what you saw were cash and overpass matches. Liquid able to have pretty good CT sides on both, but also had a pretty good overpass T side. I guess like a general kind of trend that we saw in this tournament for Liquid is everyone was playing really well, which was certainly a positive note when you look back at Gfinity Spring Masters 2, where Adren really wasn't having much of an impact with an op whatsoever. Granted, there were many cases where he was unlucky. It was funny, like Daze did a video, I think, reviewing a demo against Voximinor on D2, and he kind of like highlighted a moment where Adren got ripped in the face by an AK through double doors, and some really unlucky things did happen to him, but in general, he still wasn't having the impact that you would want him to have. I mean, this guy used to be one of the best oppers in North American Counter-Strike Source. He was one of the best oppers in the world in Counter-Strike Source towards the last couple of years of the game. And in CSGO, he was kind of a rifler for most of his career up until this team. This is actually the first pro team he's been like an opper for, but he's also doing the in-game leading. But regardless, I mean, he was actually opping really well throughout this entire tournament. Nitro, the big guy that you look to in Liquid, their main entry fragger, also one of their, side anchors on many sites on the CT side, like A, for instance, on Cash, or he plays the outer yard on Train, trying to anchor these different, big, wide open areas, basically, which he seems to excel at. He dropped the 30 bomb on CLG on Overpass. Adren, like I said, had 20 bombs in both maps. I mean, so he was looking pretty good as well with the op. And in general, what I'll just say, just to get this out there about Liquid, is in my video I did about them specifically not too long ago, I kind of highlighted some of the biggest issues that they had were, A, they just have a lot of youth and inexperience on the team, which leads to point B, which is just, prone to a lot of mistakes. Maybe on T side, not peaking together as a team, not being on the same page, or people overextending and trying to make plays by themselves, different things like that. And then B on the CT side, not coordinated on their retakes sometimes, just different things like that. And also, we did mention kind of Adren having some issues, being able to opt consistently. Elige, who's looked really great for them in online league play, had some rough matches on LAN. Nitro, the guy that seems to have this big potential and at times like a really heavy entry fragger for this team. He certainly had his bad moments as well overseas, but in this particular qualifier event, granted it is lesser competition. They're not playing against the likes of, Navi and Fnatic and all these teams, where they're playing against, NA teams that aren't as strong as some of these other names that I've mentioned. So there is definitely that, of course. That's a big factor. I mean, you can't just gloss over that. But the point is that even if that is the case, they still at least look on the same page on when they were running strats. And so I don't know if it's a case where they get overseas, they get jitters or nervous, or they kind of lose their composure, and that's why they're making all these mistakes overseas, where it seems like recently, in I guess the last 2 or 3 weeks of NA League play as well as this qualifier, they look much more disciplined. They look like they're synced up. They seem to be playing these T-sides and such in a way that does seem more structured and uniform and not so loose and just people making individual plays that are weird or anything like that. They look better as a team, and Nitro seems to be showing us that high potential again, just fragging really well in this CLG series. Then they move on to play against Elevate, another 2-0 series. Once again, not having too much trouble. I think they they just had a really one-sided games against Elevate is the best way I can put it, on D2 and Train. And once again, Nitro near 30 frags on Dust 2. I think he had 28, and then on Train he had 23. So once again, Nitro playing really well. Adren and Elige are also near the 20s in both these games against Elevate. So once again, they're looking really good. And I haven't really mentioned Flowsick or Fugly, but they weren't too far behind either. They're probably in the teens somewhere, slightly positive, maybe neutral on the KD ratio. And that's about where you expect those two support players to be, though Fugly definitely has the potential to have some big games himself. But he is a pretty stable support player who's going to be typically kind of second, third place on the team no matter what everyone else is doing. But it just so happened that it seemed like Nitro was just going off every single game this tournament. He was always kind of up top or close to it. So certainly a good tournament for him, and they got past Elevate with no problem. And then they play Cloud9 in the finals, and I kind of want to talk about Cloud9 first, and then I'll talk about the finals, and then we'll get to some of these other teams. I feel like that probably flows a little bit better. So with all the 2-1 against Lunatic, the 2-0 against CLG, the 2-0 against Elevate, Liquid's in the finals, right? So then it's Cloud9, their journey on the opposite end of the bracket. So they play SKDC first. I'm not even sure. Yeah, okay, I got all the teams there. Cloud9 plays SKDC first. They 2-0 SKDC. Pretty close games, though. Like, I think Cash went to overtime. Dust 2 is also a pretty close game, but they come up with the 2-0, so they get past SKDC, no problem. Then they go up against Affinity. And I'll just make a note about Affinity now, because I don't have, like, a specific section about this team in this video, just because they did get 2-1 by Cloud9. That was the end of their tournament. But Affinity, ever since they picked up Arya and Abe, they've looked pretty good, actually. I mean, they got an upset win against D2 on Cloud9. It was a pretty big win. It was a pretty one-sided win. I think they got like 13 rounds on T side in the first half of that Dust 2 game, so Cloud only able to come up with 2 CT rounds on a half of D2. That's certainly kind of poor for Cloud9, but also just a good performance by Affinity on the T side of that map. And they've been able to also score some wins against some other teams, or some ties in the CEVO Season 7 League against some of the, top Tier 1 NA teams on a couple of different occasions. And so they're, kind of a team that is kind of, Tier 2 middle of the pack now, but they're, fighting to break into the Tier 1, and they have some good wins under their belt. So that is a team to kind of maybe keep an eye on, either as a team or some of their players maybe getting shots on some of these other Tier 1 teams later on down the road. But definitely just, Affinity, while they did get knocked out here, I think this was a quarterfinals match in the qualifier. Their online play has actually been, quite good lately, so they're definitely kind of proving themselves. So I just want to make a quick note there. But after the D2 upset that I talked about, they won on Cash and Cobble pretty convincingly, Cloud9 did. So they move on to the semifinals to play against Luminosity Gaming. And against Luminosity Gaming, I mean, they just absolutely crushed Luminosity Gaming. There's really no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We've talked about how Inferno and Cash, and then the CT sides on those two maps and just Cloud9 CT sides in general seem to be kind of their weakest points, besides some talks about some of their players and inconsistencies with some of them. The main thing when it comes to like maps, it seemed like Cloud9 CT sides in general were shaky. Inferno was the biggest example of that, probably from like the middle of 2014 up until today. And then Cash is kind of second on the list, also struggling on some CT sides on that map as well. And I've seen this time and time again. I saw it, during this tournament. I even saw it, like they had to play an ESCA game against CLG, and they had like a big T side in the first half on Cash, but struggled to close out the game on CT side. And we've seen this happen overseas as well, just issues with the CT side. Cash, I think they're still trying to figure it out, to be honest. But anyway, in this particular set where they played against LG on Inferno, they had a big CT side. I think they either won, 12 or 13 rounds on CT side. They've made some adjustments. You can kind of see now that, Shroud's firmly been anchoring the pit and the lane side of the map for quite some time, and he's still in that position. You kind of have nothing playing this rotator position. Sometimes he's doubling up Arch because that's kind of where Skadoodle is going to default play with the op, but obviously they make many plays kind of putting Skadoodle at the car and trying to make him be kind of the B-bomb side anchor when he can get to the car with the op. And then you have the Sean Garish Freakazoid combo over on the B side of the map. And I still think that B side's a little bit weak for Cloud9. They don't seem to have like a firm anchor like some of these other top teams on Inferno CT side have, especially in the European scene with guys like Krems or, Freiburg for NIP or MBK for Envious or Neo for VP. Not saying that those players are like the star players for their team, but they play this anchor role on the B side of Inferno quite well, and I feel like Cloud9 still don't have that. Sean is kind of the anchor for this team because Freakazoid is the one more prone to rotate and help out at A if need be, but it's still a little bit weak for them there, but in general, their CT sides to look much better. They don't have that weak exposed Arch side anymore because Skadoodle is able to hold that pretty firm when he's playing there with the op, and Nothing has been a pretty good rotator for them playing that position as well when need be. And, I mean, he dropped a 30 bomb against LG on this game on Inferno. Shroud dropped almost 30 on the Cash game, and so Sean was even in the 20s both games, so looking good. And, Skadoodle and everybody else definitely playing up to par as well. So just a really heavy win against Luminosity Gaming, a pretty good win for Cloud9, but I guess this was to be expected. Cloud9 has been kind of the favorite in A lately. I think people point to Keyed Stars, coming over from Brazil as being like jokingly North America's best, and I think on some maps they probably are, but it seems like Cloud9 has had a little bit better fortune than in Keyed Stars, at least in the last like couple of weeks of me making this video. But they do make it to the grand finals because of this, and that's where we'll leave Cloud9 for now, right? And now we'll just talk about the grand finals, right? And then I'll kind of hit some of these other teams that were in the tournament as well. So in the finals, it's kind of unfortunate what happens, but it starts out pretty normal. We do have Train up first. In the game, we did have essentially Liquid able to get 10 rounds on CT side in the first half, so Cloud9 able to get 5 rounds from the T side. So not bad for Train, typically a pretty heavily CT-sided map, but it was in fact Liquid who were able to come out a little bit better. They were able to put 6 rounds on the board on the T side, limiting Cloud9 to just 9 CT rounds and winning the map 16-14. It's a very, very close game indeed. I think at one point, if I'm not mistaken, Liquid had like a 13-5 lead, and then Cloud9 made a crazy comeback to make it like 14-13 from the CT side, but then it was Liquid who won out the last 3 rounds to actually close out the game 16-14. Nitro, once again, playing very, very well. I've kind of been hinting at how well he played this tournament. I think he had 26 on this game, and they just played really, really well in this. Now, Map 2 is going to be Overpass, and it was a completely different story. Nothing close about it. Cloud9 just absolutely shredded Liquid on Overpass. There's really no other way to say it. I mean, they beat them, I think it was like 16-5 or something like that. Very, very one-sided game. Yeah, I mean, everyone on Liquid was playing okay, but it was just Cloud9 who just looked excellent. Just played really, really good game, and were able to take it. And that was pretty much it. And then it came down to Cash, right? So this is the final map, a map that both teams are pretty solid on. Typically, Liquid has the good CT side, sometimes struggles on T. It's kind of the inverse for Cloud9. Typically has pretty good T sides, but sometimes struggle on CT. In fact, it's probably one of their weakest CT maps now, if not the weakest now that they've seen to kind of figure out Inferno. Freakazoid had been plagued with internet issues pretty much the whole tournament. I was seeing him having high ping. It doesn't look like he was getting DDoS. It looked like he just had like terrible routing or terrible internet, because he was just like constantly like in the 80s or 90s ping wise, no matter the server location. I'm not sure what the server location was, but everyone else was like in the 40s and 50s ping wise. Whereas, and I know Nothing lives on the West Coast as well, so for him to be like pinging in the 40s or 50s, but Freakazoid to be in like the 90s, there had to be some kind of internet issue there. But it didn't seem like a DDoS, because it wasn't like he had crazy high ping. And they were just having the pause. He wasn't even crashing. So unless it was like a really terrible DDoS, I think it was just him having terrible internet. So someone please from Cloud9 buy this man some better internet so you don't have this problem in the future if it is in fact an internet issue. But I'm a little bit ignorant here. I don't know exactly what the problem was, but he was having internet issues the majority of the finals. He had to pause the game a bajillion times throughout the series. It wound up being one of the longest best of threes I've ever been a part of because of all the pauses. Plus, we had the pause for an hour in between maps 1 and 2 for Cloud9 to go play another league game that couldn't be rescheduled. And it was just a big mess of a grand finalist, if I'm 100% honest with you. But really wasn't our fault or ESWC's fault. It was just like internet issues with Freakazoid, and then them having another match they had to play, which we were, willing to bend to allow them to go do that and come back. But anyway, on Cash, because of this, Cloud9 has to use the stand-in. They had to bring in Stunna, who did play several rounds, and then eventually he left, and they brought in Davey from Affinity to finish out the game. And it wound up being a 16-13 victory for Liquid, so still a very close game despite all the obstacles that Cloud9 faced. And there's really 2 big points I want to make here. One is I definitely understand that there will forever kind of be this asterisk or this footnote or whatever you want to call it at the bottom of this tournament where people will always kind of reference to it and say, oh yeah, Liquid won, but if Cloud9 could have had their full 5 without internet issues, then they would have been the champions and they would have represented USA at ESWC, not Liquid. Okay, so there's that. First of all, I understand that, and as close as Map 3 was, you could definitely make that argument. It's probably a pretty valid one. If it would have been like a complete blowout in Liquid's favor, then I probably would have been more prone to say, yeah, I don't think it would have mattered. But because the game was really close, yeah, I think it did have a significant difference, and I think that could be true. But that's not Liquid's fault. Liquid still showed up. They played their A game, and it was enough to win the tournament. They have no control over C9's issues or what was going on there. They just show up, and they just play the game. And they played a really good tournament. Like I said, I thought they had the harder path to the finals than Cloud9. Cloud9 had to get past SKDC and Affinity and Luminosity. Meanwhile, Liquid's playing against teams like Elevate and CLG to get into the final. So I think they played some harder NA teams to get to the final. And then once they got into the final, they straight up won Train. I mean, Cloud9 had their full 5 that game. Yeah, Freakazoid had some internet issues, but they were able to kind of get past it, and I thought that map played out pretty fairly, and it was a pretty close win in favor of Liquid, and I think Liquid has kind of started to establish themselves as maybe one of the best Train teams, at least within the NA region. I would just say with the NA region, I don't know what they would do internationally on Train. I don't think it'd be that well, but they're proving themselves to be the top NA team on Train. Because Cloud9 I thought was kind of the top NA team on Train based on what I had been seeing, but Liquid maybe takes that throne a little bit. So there's not much you can say about that one. And yeah, they straight up got crushed in Overpass, so you got to give Cloud9 the nod there. But when it came to this cash game, it was close. And yes, Cloud9 maybe would have won if they would have had their 5. But like I said, that's no fault to Liquid. They played a good tournament all the way through and through. And even if Cloud9, like you think should have been the champion, should have been the representative, you can't argue that Liquid isn't a deserving team to take the slot. They played a good tournament. And I think that they are a deserving team to represent USA. Just based on the results from this tournament, some of their recent online play, they do have some of the best players in the scene. So yeah, I think they do still deserve it. It's unfair for you to kind of like attack Liquid and say, "Oh, screw you guys don't deserve to go." Whatever, man. They just played the tournament. They can't control everything. Stop getting mad at Liquid. Whatever. And the other point I will make is this: is that some people, I've already seen it. I've seen some analysts like Lerpus say it already, that like another disappointing performance for Cloud9. Man, they can't do anything right. You know what? You don't know the situation, man. You probably didn't watch the tournament, and I can't blame him for not watching it. It was a small USA tournament. I'm sure he wasn't that involved, and that's perfectly fine. But I thought Cloud9 played a pretty good tournament. If they wouldn't have had this issue with having a stand-in on this other BS, then they probably could have won it. It was a really close game on Map 3. So, like I said, I'll admit that Cloud9 probably had a chance to win if they would have had their full 5 and not all these internet issues or whatever. So, yeah, I don't think it was that disappointing of a performance from Cloud9. Sure, Spring Masters Gfinity 2 was a disappointing, performance for Cloud9. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that part, and you can argue that all you want. And all the international tournaments before that, though they didn't have the 5 they have now, and all those other tournaments before that, were also disappointing. They've been disappointing since like mid-2014, I guess you could say. But so far with this 5, this version of Cloud9, they've only played one international tournament, which yes was disappointing, but in the NA scene and online league play, they've done fine. And in this tournament, they did fine. It was just unfortunate circumstances in the grand final. So basically, I'll just conclude this point by just saying that, A, don't blame Liquid for winning. It's not their fault what happened, and they did play a good tournament. And secondly, don't sit here and say that Cloud9 had another horrible performance or something like that. No, they played a good tournament, and they got unlucky in the grand finals, and they definitely were still – it was a close grand finals, and unfortunately, they had some huge obstacles they had to face, and they still did all right. They still made it a close series, even despite all the hurdles they had to jump over. So I'll just leave it at that. So that's pretty much the main part of the tournament, right? So now I'll just kind of briefly talk about some of the other teams that were in the tournament and how they did. So Nihilum was one of the other, big NA teams. They have those 2 veterans in Symphis and Hiko. They have guys like Unimatic and Sexington who showed a lot of promise when you look at like the CEVO Season 6 LAN and the last ESEA LAN we had Season 18 where they like upset Cloud9 and different things like that and even challenged some maps against some of the EU teams. Nihilum had to play Tempo in the opening game, which was like a ESEA main team, which does pretty good in that league, but granted it is like a semi-pro team or like a, not quite amateur, but like they're a semi-pro team, not a professional team. And they 2-0'd that, no problem. Then they move on to play against Elevate, and they just got straight up 0-2'd. Nihilum's been struggling their T-sides in general, especially on maps like D2 where you kind of expect to get good T rounds. I've seen games against like Luminosity, for example, they only got 2 rounds on T side on D2, and in this particular game, they only got 5 rounds on T side in the first half against Elevate, and then couldn't really get anything going on CT either. And then the second map was Cobble, and they got 8 rounds on T side Cobble, which is pretty good. I mean, I've seen teams more towards like 9 or 10, but 8's not bad. But once they couldn't actually get anything on their CT side this time, so. I would say a general pattern has been that their D2 T side's been slightly weak, and most of their T sides have had issues. Their CTs have been okay, with the exception of Cobble. It's like the flip side, which is because Cobble's a bit more of a T-sided map, so that's understandable that it would be that way. But I'll admit I didn't really get to watch Nihilum's games because I was busy casting other games while Nihilum was playing, and there's no demos, I don't think, out yet for Nihilum's games. So I haven't been able to watch them. But you can just tell from what I've heard talking to people on the teams and like seeing the stat lines and things like that. Like Hiko just looked off. Like I've never seen him really go negative before against some of these other NA teams. Typically he's positive or one of the top fraggers on the team. And in this game he these both maps, he was, low on the scoreboard, like the like fourth place on the team or something like that, or maybe even dead last. So he definitely struggled from what I could tell just looking at the figures. He didn't seem to have good games as a player. Sankington also was really off on the first map from what I could tell. Everyone else performed about where you expect, but it seemed like those two struggled on D2, and then Cobble. No one really played well on Cobble, if we're honest. And so that's pretty much how their tournament went. They got eliminated pretty early by Elevate, and that was that. Now, when you look at Elevate, they did get that 2-0 against Nihilum. Everyone looked good on the Dust 2 map. Roka dropped 30. Everyone else was pretty much on the 20s. Same with Cobble. The only exception was like XP3, who kind of bottom fragged both maps. But whatever. Everyone else that you expect, which is like the trifecta of, Roka, Rush, and Desi. Those are like the three big guys you expect. They were playing well against Nihilum, and they 2-0'd them. But then when we get to Liquid, they just got absolutely crushed. Like, Rush and Desi looked horribly off on Dust 2. Roka wasn't really doing much better in these games, to be honest, and Train was pretty much the same story. And I mean, maybe with Train, they just don't play Train very often, so I can't really make too much of a statement there. But on Dust 2, you would have expected a little bit better out of Elevate, and they looked way off. They weren't getting anything done on CT side. Like, Liquid was able to just walk all over them. Nitro was just putting on a clinic against them, coming up cat and executing the A-bomb site. Dren was out-opping them. I mean, everything was just going Liquid's way, and Elevate just had nothing to put up against it. And so that was kind of Elevate's tournament. And when you look at Luminosity Gaming, they played Method first, and they 2-1 that. Method, kind of one of the up-and-coming kind of new faces to, I guess, the professional scene when you look at the ESCAP division, or the professional division there, and then, the CEVO Pro League. They had a pretty close 2-1 series against Method, actually, so that's like pretty good for Method, and that isn't good for Luminosity, who wants to kind of set themselves above some of these like new middle-of-the-pack teams. But they still wound up getting the win there in the 2-1 series, winning Dust 2 and Inferno, though losing Overpass. And I think it was an overtime when they lost an Overpass, so it wasn't like a crazy bad loss or something. But then they played against Cloud9, and similarly to how Elevate got steamrolled by Liquid, Luminosity got steamrolled by Cloud9. Pretty much every single player on both maps never got past single digits kills-wise. They got beat 16-2 on Inferno and 16-4 on Cash, so they really just... They couldn't get anything done on their T-side Inferno. Then it was pretty much over after the first half at that point because they were just so far behind. And then on Cash, pretty similar story. They actually couldn't get anything going on their CT side against C9's T side, which is generally pretty good on Cash. Their CT side looked weak. I mean, some of their main players like Pitt, who is like really instrumental on this team. He's one of their main rotators on CT side on both these maps I mentioned. So on Inferno, he is kind of one of the main rotators there between B and mid. Definitely. Or I guess no, he's more like the lane pit player on Inferno, and he was definitely struggling from that spot. And then on Cash, he is their main mid to A rotator, kind of playing that highway position. He was kind of struggling there against Cloud9 as well. And I guess I was going to say on T side, Inferno, which is where they really struggled in that series. He's like one of their main guys attacking the B bomb site along with NAF, and that's a site they like to hit a lot. And Sean and Freakazoid, I would say that's kind of the weaker of the two sides for Cloud9. Not like crazy weaker than the other side, but I think it is the weaker side, and they couldn't get anything going. Like Pitt and NAF could not get any entries really on the B side of the map. They were getting shut down, and so Luminosity. While I think Cloud9 was always the favorite, and so maybe Luminosity isn't that disappointed that they lost to Cloud9, in the way in which they lost, it was so one-sided. They didn't show much of anything, and that is a little bit disappointing because Luminosity is a team that has invested a lot in Pitt, bringing him overseas, getting NAF. They've really just restructured their roster quite a lot. But I will say this about Luminosity Gaming. They look much better than the Luminosity we saw at the CEVO Season 6 LAN and the last ESCA LAN. The roster moves that they have made have improved the team. I think, Pitt coming in, NAF coming in, Peter coming in as an opera and in-game leader. I think these were all upgrades to the members that got benched or, cut or moved to other teams in place of these guys. I think they are better players. And I heard they were having some internet issues, too, in some of their games, which might have had an effect on Anger and Pitt's play. I'm not really sure how far that goes. But I will say that Luminosity does look better. So they do look improved, but they still have some improving to do if they want to be up there with some of the other Tier 1 teams and competing for land spots. And I mean, right now, they're still in contention for land spots for both the ESA, ESL Pro League as well as the CEVO MLG Season 7 Pro League. So, I mean, they're still in contention, don't get me wrong. But they did kind of have a really rough loss to C9 in this tournament. And that's pretty much all the teams I wanted to focus on. Just like I said, kind of a brief recap / reflection and talking about some of the different points from some of these teams. And with that being said, I will go ahead and sign off. I know this has gone on a little bit longer than I expected. I will let you know I'm still working on some other stuff. I'm still going to keep working on that Behind the Play series, so be on the lookout for that coming out. I am working on a Who Is series. But that does take up a bit more time to do. It's a lot of research, a lot like doing the interview with the player to get a little bit more information. So I'm still trying to gather all that stuff together, and I've been really busy lately. I mean, I cast every single day for like 6 hours for the CEVO MLG Pro League. I was doing casting for the ESWC Qualifiers this past weekend. I'm writing articles for an iBuyPower event that's coming up for NA as well, so that's taking up my time, like doing research and writing these articles. And then it's just much easier for me to post vlogs like this one, just reflecting on things that I'm already familiar with, or, doing the behind the plays even a bit easier because I pretty much have an idea of the plays I'm going to do videos on already for like the next 5 or 6 videos. So it's much easier to get those out. But the Who Is series is like a way bigger project, so it's going to take a bit more time for me to get that out there. But be on the lookout for that, hopefully sometime soon. I am definitely working on it, but I do have a lot of other responsibilities and things to attend to, which does take away from my time to be able to focus on that specific video project. But it'll eventually come, I promise. Just it may take a while. But yeah, without further ado, I'll sign off. Hope you enjoyed it. Follow and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.